In the run-up to presidential elections, Somalia has been rocked by violence. This attack took place last month at a hotel near the Parliament building in Mogadishu. At least 28 people died, adding to the death toll of the decade-long insurgency waged by al-Shabaab. The armed group was forced out of the capital in 2011 by a joint Somali military and African Union peacekeeping force, AMISOM. The government continues to rely on about 22,000 of its soldiers and police to stabilise the country. But this hasn't stopped al-Shabaab from continuing to attack government buildings, peacekeeping stations and civilians. And it's amidst this backdrop that the nation has been taking tentative steps towards democracy, more than 2 decades after civil war erupted in 1991 and fractured the country.
Somalia cannot hide from or wish away their difficult past, as it clearly have impacted on us all heavily, but there is no denying our collective ambition to never return to it.
Somalia is home to about 11 million people, but only a fraction of them took part in last year's parliamentary elections. Clan chiefs selected the 14,000 people to vote for the 329 members of the upper and lower houses. That process didn't go through without controversy. The UN, AU and EU issued a joint statement to raise concerns about egregious cases of abuse of the electoral process, including seats reserved for women candidates only, ultimately taken by male candidates. Despite this, there is optimism about what the new government can do for Somalis.
The new parliament is younger, more diverse, and likely to be more responsive to the electorate than the previous one. In short, this parliament is more legitimate and representative than any since the last elections were held in 1969.
This week, MPs are due to decide who will be the next Somali president and whether incumbent Hassan Sheikh Mohammed will be given another 4-year term. A major step for the nation's delicate democracy. Natalie Pohanen, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Mogadishu is Abdurrahman Yusuf Hussein Ainti. He is the Minister of Planning and International Cooperation in the Somali government. Minister, thanks so much for joining us. Big day on Wednesday, presidential election. How high are the stakes for your country?
Very high. We don't have presidential elections very often, once every 4 years or so. And this is going to be a major change in the way we handle elections. These elections have been a lot more different than previous elections in that a lot more people have participated in the electoral process. We used to have an election where few people essentially decided who was going to be the leader of this country. But now we've had about 20,000 people or so elect a bicameral legislature who are now electing the president.
I'm looking at some of the problems of Somalia, and my apologies, there are so many to choose from here. It's a shaky, fragile situation politically for your country. So you have al-Shabaab attacks, you have a strange and sometimes difficult relationship with AMISOM. There's a security threat for locals and foreigners alike. What do you think is the biggest problem that needs to be fixed and can be fixed by a new president putting it at the top of his agenda?
Certainly, security comes at the top of the agenda. We've had an improved security overall, I would say, in the past 4 years. But at the same time, I think most Somalis would be critical if they hear me say this, because they feel every day that insecurity has increased in some parts of the country, especially in Mogadishu. So putting together a very competent security apparatus and also restoring security in many parts of the country, as well as at least if not eliminating, decreasing the number of major terrorist attacks by al-Shabaab and other groups would be a top priority.
What are you most proud of over the past 4.5 years?
Well, certainly a lot has been achieved in the last 4.5 years. One of the, I believe, major achievements is that we've been able to tackle some of the key issues of creating a federal structure for the country. 4.5 years ago, there was only one federal member state. Today, we have 5 federal member states in our new federal architecture. That's an achievement in and of itself. The second one is that we've been able to articulate a kind of an economic recovery plan for the next 3 years, that we've just finalized our first national development plan in 3 years. We've also been able to review our constitution, although that's an ongoing process. And of course, even though we have fallen short of holding one person, one vote elections, we've been able to add some 20,000 people into our electoral system. So these are some of the few achievements, but of course we could have done a lot better than we've actually done in the last 4 years.
Can your country ever be fully independent, fully free, as long as it's dependent in so many ways on those AMISOM troops?
Actually, next month will mark the 10th anniversary of the African Union peacekeeping mission in Somalia. And there is now an increased debate within Somalia, within policymakers, to try and see how we can essentially untangle ourselves from what is now increasingly looks like an over-reliance on external security forces. You know, critics would be legitimate to say that we could have charted a different path over the past 4 years.
You mentioned that there's so many candidates in the presidential election. Does that make Wednesday's vote all the more unpredictable?
Certainly. I mean, there are 24 men running for the top seat of the country. Very few have a realistic chance of actually making it to the top. It is a very competitive electoral election that we're going to have on Wednesday. And, one has to look at these things in context. We live in one of the most undemocratic regions in the world. The Horn of Africa is not a very democratic region. So, in a way, Somalis feel proud of, some of our, rudimentary democratic credentials. Not as good and as transparent and as clean as one would have liked, but certainly a lot better than a lot of the neighboring countries, for example.
Now, Minister, we first encountered each other when you were donning a different hat, when you were a journalist, and you wrote very well over the years. I would follow a lot of your writing. In 2012, you wrote about the Somali presidential elections then, and you said, Somali presidential elections, 6 ways to win power. And you said base support, money, political network, external support, name recognition, and a presence in Somalia. And in your final line was interesting, because you said the archaic clannish way of seeking the presidency, while still omnipresent, is beginning to lose momentum. The next election, just 5 short years away, i.e. now, will hopefully be a lot more vibrant and far less clan-oriented. So I ask you, 5 years later, do you feel that that is the case?
Well, certainly, I did not have, the good foresight that I should have had, but clearly we have made a major progress in terms of leaving some of our traditional ways of elections. Certainly, the issue of clan and tribe continues to play a major role in our political system, but not as omnipresent as it used to be a few years ago. And we now have a very clear plan that in 4 years' time, political parties will play a lot bigger role than they do play right now. And so we're leaving some of our legacy behind, but we're also now kind of climbing through the ropes, learning new tactics to our political system.
Minister Abdi, it's been great talking to you. Thanks so much for taking the time.